Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Welcome listeners to today's Extrology podcast, where we'll be exploring once more the extraordinary journeys and the minds that redefine the possible. And today we're diving into a story that at its heart is a testament to the human spirit's indomitable resilience and strength. Our guest is Darren Hardy, a man whose life reads like an epic saga of endurance, determination, and profound altruism. Darren is not your ordinary athlete. He's an ultra runner, an extreme endurance athlete, and a holder of multiple Guinness World Records. But beyond the physical feats lies a story of transformation and a triumph over adversity. Through brutal exercise, Darren found a way to combat his PTSD, a relentless reminder of his time in the British Army and the haunting memories of Basra. Darren harnessed his considerable energy and compassion, embarking on punishing challenges to raise awareness for funds for those in dire need. Pulling a car non-stop for 53 kilometres to set a world record is just one of the many ways Darren smashes limits, not just physically, but in what we believe to be possible. Esteemed by figures like Adam Peaty, James Haskell and Tyson Fury, and admired by the elite of the Special Forces, Darren Hardy stands as a beacon of what it means to turn personal battles into a force for good. His story is one of mental fortitude, and of a life so extraordinary it seems to encompass 5 lifetimes. So join us as we delve into Darren's world, exploring what drives him, the process behind selecting his unimaginable challenges, and the profound impact of his work. From running 5 marathons in 50 hours to support a girl with a rare disease, to the deeper question of what success and resilience truly mean. This is a conversation about the essence of adventure, the strength of the human spirit, and the relentless quest for growth. So what's the story behind the story? Without further ado, let's get into it. Darren Hardy, welcome to Extrology. Great to have you here as my guest. Really appreciate your time. Looking forward to getting stuck into to all sorts of things today. But first and foremost, how are you? How's your day started? How are you keeping?
Good. Thanks very much. And thanks for having me, Lee. It's been a real, I've been looking forward to this podcast, actually. I've done a fair few in the past, and this one strikes me, I think, through the connection and having listened to your podcast as well. So thanks for having me. Appreciative of that. But yeah, I'm good. Good. Day's been good. Nipped over to see some of the guys at Through Dark this morning for a bit of a catch up and a brew before coming here and doing some work and chilling out. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, let's get stuck in. And ordinarily, I might start for context with kind of a bit more of a backstory, which we'll go into in due course. But I want to start today, and I'm going to read because it's the only way I'm actually going to make sure I get them all right. But I just want for listeners to understand the magnitude of some of the things that you've undertaken, because they are frankly phenomenal. September 2021. If I get any of these wrong, my research proves incorrect, please correct me. Yeah. September 2021, world's toughest ultra, the farthest distance, dragging a 1500 kg car in 24 hours, 37 kilometers in 24 hours, and the furthest distance dragging a 1500 kilogram car ever, 53 kilometers.
Yes.
Okay. April 2021, 5 marathons in 50 hours.
Yes.
Self-sufficient.
Just close to here, actually, as well.
Very close to here. Mm-hmm. December 2020, 190 kilometers, world's highest duathlon at 12,000 feet. So that was a 10K run, 150K bike.
And then a 30K run. Yes.
October 2020, 10 ultra distance triathlons in 10 days in 10 locations.
Yeah.
August 2020, 933 kilometre adventure triathlon.
Yes.
July 2020, a 203 kilometre run.
Yep.
May 2020, 121 kilometre charity treadmill run. Carrying 35 pounds.
Yep.
Extreme isolation, which was a world first on VE Day, 8th of May 2020.
Yes, that was it, in a blacked out tent. Yes, nothing but a little tiny red light.
And then a 300 kilometre road run, Manchester to London in 2022.
Yes, yeah.
To name but a few. I think it's fair to say, Darren, your journey is a profound narrative of resilience and transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share, by way of a starter, the moment, if you like, that you realised that extreme endurance challenges were your way of battling PTSD and keeping your life on course?
Yeah, so it's a really good question because I'm not an endurance athlete. I'm not built, I'm 95 kilos, I'm not built for road running and all that stuff. So so a bit of a backstory. I served in the military for just shy of 15 years. I was medically discharged actually in September 2017 with physical and sort of mental, so PTSD injuries mainly from the Iraq War back in 2006. And when you come out of the forces, there's not a lot. I suppose I was accustomed to. I was in a brotherhood, that, and no disrespect to anyone who hasn't served, but that civvies just don't get.
I can imagine. I haven't served, but I can only be. I can imagine. I could begin to imagine.
Yeah. It's just it's from daily routine to decision making to doing tasks on demand to to eating, sleeping, fighting together, and going out and drinking with all your mates together. It's just a very close-knit community that's difficult when you are told to leave because you're not fit for service anymore. Where do you go? What do I do? How do I slot in?
And how do you, I'm jumping in, sorry, but that you make a really good point there. I've never thought of it as quite that way, that when you're making a conscious decision to leave, I suspect difficult though that may be, you go through a process and you reach that conclusion. Whereas when you're forced into it, I never thought of it as quite that way. It's not necessarily your choice or decision to leave. It's forced upon you. How do you cope with all that brings upon you?
Yeah, not the best. So first of all, the process isn't the best, I would say, in my eyes. I was an army officer at this point. I started as a soldier and then I commissioned from the ranks to be an officer. And you're sort of just left to your own devices in that. Then you get almost marched into a final medical hearing where there was 3 crusty old men that had served maybe as a doctor in this forces, and didn't basically they read out your discharge, and you're actually discharged under the Invaliding Act, is what it is from a military perspective. And to hear that, up until that point, right to that point, I never thought much of it. And then when I've been discharged under the Warrant Officers and Officers Invaliding Act, or words to that effect, definitely the Invaliding Act's in there, hit me, and I just broke down in tears in this place. Thought, who are you to say I'm unfit? And it was quite a bitter pill to swallow. It was very hard to swallow actually. And then they go through everything, and then next minute I'm out of the forces and working in KPMG in London, following the route of an officer, and that's when things started to get really, really difficult for me. Sort of through realizing I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2015. And it was an event that happened in Iraq where a helicopter was shot down and we were part of a cleanup crew. I was fine for 9 years until I was in Canada on a training exercise when a soldier fell into a fire. And my team and I saved her life, got a medical helicopter and evacuation, the whole lot. I'm probably dumbing it down a little bit here, but I'm conscious I want to get it across. And the smell of the burning flesh on that soldier triggered the smell of the burning flesh from Iraq 9 years previous.
9 years.
Yeah.
It was going to be one of my questions as to how it takes 9 years in your case, and I'd imagine every case is different, but that for that PTSD to finally kind of manifest, if you like, to really come clear. 9 years.
9 years it took, yeah. There may have been some bits and pieces there, but that was the smell of that burning flesh was the trigger for me. And, I've got friends that there was only a small group of us on that helicopter site that day of, there was 5 bodies mangled in a downed Lynx helicopter. When we got onto the roof of the Basra, you could just see the rotary blades. And then part of the main fuselage and the tail, there was a bit in an alleyway, and then that and there's the other. So we were tasked to find the dog tags, so the identification. And sometimes we just couldn't even differentiate between body and helicopter. It was that bad. And so some of my friends now still, I've got a friend who won't eat chicken off the bone from that day. I mean, we're talking stuff everywhere, and it's probably for the viewers, it is a bit of detail, and but I think it's important to get that across, another friend who thinks about it a lot. And yeah, he's very much got PTSD also, and didn't admit to it. I think that's is a big problem. You don't surrender to it. You don't admit to it because you're taught in your military training to have that stiff upper lip approach and just get on with it, So when you come out into Civvy Street, and then everything just started manifesting, and all unfolded to that point, and I was really struggling. And then other pieces would flash back in. So the crowds on the tube, on the train, people being around me, I feel myself getting really agitated, and especially seeing like someone in a burqa or something that would trigger something back to Iraq. I would just feel this whole like fight or flight, and the sweaty palms.
So real physical manifestation.
Really physically, and it's a bit of a cliche, but I've only had it a couple of times where the car has backfired. And of recent, last year, I was driving my car around a roundabout in Basingstoke, and a car had backfired sort of off to the 1 o'clock position. I know it's a car backfiring, but the instant reaction, this all happens in a second, less than a second. I can see my hands with my gloves on in the desert holding onto a Land Rover wheel, and then I'm back in the room, I'm back, it's there. But that instant, heart raising, sweaty palms. And another similar, last year, again, walking my girls home from school. It was a bit dusty with the sunshine, whenever that was last here in the UK. And I seen a woman in a park with a burqa on, and my kids would run around the sort of the wooded area, and I was walking, and instantly I'd look down, I could see myself, my boots walking in the desert, and my desert kit on, and holding a weapon system. I was holding a couple of school bags, and that's a split second, and it's back in the room. But it really takes it away from you, and that's the type of stuff with a flashback, and similar with the crowds in London. Really, and we were involved in some very sort of public order events where people are surrounding you and trying to get your stuff out of your pouches and all sorts, and just constantly on at you, and I'm not comfortable in that position.
And when you're in the military, if you go back to 2006 or the noughties, is there an acknowledgement when you've been to such an event of the like of which you're present? Is there a process afterwards where someone will sit you down and say, "Look, there's a chance this is gonna come back at some point in the future. So we need to start." I don't even know the psychology behind it. I'm not qualified to comment, but is there sort of an acknowledgement that there may well be an impact, and that therefore we can take you through, or start to take you through, a series of steps now that will help you whenever that arrives? It might be a year, it might be 5 years, to your point, 9 years. Yeah. Is there a process through which they go, or is it just, I guess, when you're in conflict, there isn't time for that, right? You're just kind of back out there and you're doing your job again.
Yeah, I mean, and think of the time frames. We're talking 18 years ago.
Yeah,
PTSD wasn't really a thing. It was came back in 37 hours. It took to sort that side out. And that was 37 hours of a grizz picking up body parts for 37 hours. Whilst there was a sniper on the roof, there was RPGs, Chinese rockets, there was riots on the floor, and we were still in this. We had an inner coordinates called of. I'm sure it was the PWRR who were giving us that ground force protection, but you can't protect against a sniper or something, it's that. So, yeah, I mean, I remember we came back when we were absolutely wrecked.
Yeah.
Just gone out, and the Sergeant Major was like, right, lads, bit of a tough time, it's just got to get up, new day. What I found really interesting is me and my mate Ads, when we came finish that, we'd have like a bit of a downtime, so like 36 hours off after that. Ads and I were young sappers, so no rank basically, so we were like usually on static, so we went straight on guard duty, after that, and you're thinking that's in so it was pretty much that. And they said, the padre's available to speak if you want to speak, so and that was it. But you're not going to speak back then. You're not going to. You're seen as weak, if you.
Yeah, and also I think to your point as well, you're a young man. Mm-hmm. Without the benefit of hindsight and wisdom and a bit of experience.
I was 20. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's. I mean, goodness, I can't even begin to comprehend what you will have seen and been through. You come into that so that sense of building resilience and the transformation through which you then found yourself going. You're at KPMG, you're having a tough time. where does the thought process start to materialize around some of the pursuits that you've tackled?
Yeah, so 2017, that was into 2018. I lasted 5 months at KPMG. I was like, I'm not cut out for the city. And then I went and worked in Skanska, so construction, which was actually a bit all right because I was back with some lads, as a project manager, have a bit of banter, and that was quite good. But it still wasn't the military, I went to work, came home every day, that's what it is. And yeah, so then things like nightmares started to increase as well. And I was like, what is the point? My daughter was born in 17. I have two daughters. One was born in 17, one was born in 18. And everything was just sort of piling up. And I just lost my mum as well in 15. So she died at 51 years old, so everything was just really piling up on me and everything. And I was like, God, I just want to be a mercenary. I was comfortable in a war conflict. That was my silence. That was my safe space in chaos. My safe space isn't sat in a room like this knowing nothing could happen. But actually, probably even right now, I'm thinking, God, what if something did happen? What if there was a bomb out there? What would we do now? And that's just the constant with it. And it's sometimes not a bad thing. You're always thinking, it keeps you on your toes, I suppose. But yeah, so it got really bad. I was like, right, I'm going to go become a mercenary. I'm going to make a shit ton of money. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, of course.
A shit ton of money, and send it back to my daughters, and I'll see what happens. If I don't come back, I don't come back. I'm going to be comfortable with what I'm doing out there, And also with it being a mercenary, there's no rules, is there? You're sort of fight for the highest bidder in essence. And actually, I was sat in Tesco car park in Aldershot, and I spoke to my uncle, so my mum's brother, who's a minister. I said, look, I'm just struggling here. And I said at this point, I had two daughters, and I grew up with no dad until I was, my mum had met my dad when I was 8 or 9. Then he adopted me. They got married. He adopted me, and that. So I'm really grateful. Me and my dad now, he's like my best mate, And then I just couldn't. My whole driving force are my girls. They are literally my driving force. And I was like, I need to do something else than potentially not come back and see them, And literally overnight, I was like, right, I'm going to go and book something extreme. So I Googled that night the world's toughest events and booked myself onto the Montane Yukon Arctic Ultra that happens in, which is a 300-mile self-sufficient race in the Yukon region, and away I went.
Not having ever done anything like this before, or even a sense of what that might entail, because you say it rolls off the tongue, but actually the reality of doing something. Had you watched videos? Was there any context?
No, I just literally Googled the world's toughest events, and having probably even been in the military, not done anything over. So I attempted Special Forces selection at one point in my career, and that's when my mum died, so we came off it. But I think the longest we did now is 65 kilometers. So, and there's me 300 miles, whatever, so 400 odd kilometers. Yeah, having never done anything over 60k in my life to go and do that. And again, I turned up and it was like these ultra runners from around the world, and I was like, and then you get your bods like me, someone that were there, but I stupidly went 6 weeks, maybe 7 weeks after major surgery on my shoulder. So I mentioned my shoulder. So I've had a partial replacement in my shoulder. I've got no anterior deltoid, and I was having real bad nerve problems. So they cut open the whole back of my shoulder 7 weeks prior to me flying out there. And they did some nerve graft on me. But there's now left I've got like a 13-inch scar across my shoulder and tricep now because of that. And I thought, I'll be grand, what's the worst that could happen? Not knowing it would drop to like minus 50, and obviously with nerve pain and everything. But we set off in the race. I didn't do much training. I got a ferry to the Isle of Wight, ran around the Isle of Wight, carrying some kit, and then got a ferry back. And that was sort of my time scale, my thought process. I thought, if I book this ferry for 22 hours, I have to run around it and get back from the ferry. And I was just going to go and do it my own. And a friend of mine, James, who's very kindly documented a lot of my projects, he came with me as a bit of support and videoed it, And that was the first thing. We did it for charity for Great Ormond Street. And I was like, I love this, And then
what did you love about it?
The pain and the uncomfortableness, yeah. And when you don't think you can go on anymore, really understanding the body. And, I'll come to a quote actually from Ollie Ollerton. So Ollie and I sort of engaged through some of the stuff, and I reached out to Ollie. I respect Ollie quite a lot, and he said to me in one of my other events, I think it was 10 marathons in 100 hours, was just break it down meter by meter squared, his words were. He sent me a text, meter by meter squared. And that's all you got to think about, just breaking everything down by a meter. If I can step a meter, step another meter. And that was it. And I sort of fell in love with that pain. And I thought, right, 300 miles in the Arctic, sleep deprivation is going to kick in. I'm good at sleep deprivation, what can I do? So then the next I thought, in the military, there's a test called it was the PFT, physical fitness test, or whatever it was, when I was in. And it's a 1.5 mile run. And for a physical training instructor, I was a PTI in the military. It's 50 press-ups, 50 sit-ups after that 1.5 mile run. Or 50 press-ups, 50 sit-ups first, then the 1.5 mile. I thought, right, I'll do that on the hour, every hour for 24 hours for a bit of sleep deprivation. And I went and did that, and I was like, yeah, this is brilliant, And I remember my mate's gym in London doing it, using a dumbbell to rest in between, and then just going for it. And we got to the Arctic. It was phenomenal. I've made mates for life actually out there, and we set off, and the first checkpoints is 26 miles. So there's people that go out and do a marathon. There's a 100 mile and there's a 300 mile. There's actually a 420 mile every other year, but that wasn't the year I was there, and I was set for the 300. And we got there and everyone was like, it's the toughest terrain we've been on ever. The first 26 miles, it's up the Yukon River, all completely obviously frozen. And I'm like, I got there and I was like, this is brilliant. I'm having a really nice time. And then when you get there, you go on up the river even further and you get a place called Overland Trail, which is your last safe point to get out. So that's sort of the end of the first day. And if you go past that point, then you're relying on your GPS tracker and your emergency SOS, get me out of here, help button. It was minus 54, I think it went to that first night. Everyone got their heads down in that tent. I'm like, I'm going to keep going. And I got to the 100-kilometer checkpoint, and I was sat in second in the race. And everyone's like, who's this guy we don't even know of? And I'm having a lovely time. That whole first night, I met up with a guy, and we walked a bit together, but I was on my own a lot. And my mates the lads there were taking the piss out of me because they're like, oh, big, hard soldier. And I was shitting myself because of the wolves. And if you Google a Yukon wolf, right, they're massive. And
right,
I'm like,
yeah.
I'm 95 kilos of meat, tired, cold, can't defend myself.
You're a walking dinner, right?
Yeah. And I'm like, people say wolves are smart, but they're clearly not, because they didn't attack me. And they don't attack me, but they stalk you. So when you're like busting for piss, you've got to really hold it into the last safe moment, because it's minus 50, when you
I was
find
going to
it,
ask us to the practicalities
when you find it to get it out, and you go and you put your head torch up, you can see all these eyes looking at you, and they're wolves and stuff. And I was like, God, this is horrendous. And so you just you go back on your trail. Hallucination kicked in for me,
right,
big time in this. And I was walking up. And I thought I seen a manatee, a sea creature. Like, what is this doing in the middle of the Yukon, And I was thinking instantly, right, how do I help it? So I'm dragging a pulk with all my kit on it. So I'll go up, I'll pick it up, I'll put it in my pulk. I'll see if it'll have any of my food. I'll put water over it, whatever it may be, to try and keep it alive. And I'll just tow it with me until I see someone, and hopefully they can take it to sea or whatever. And as I get up and I'm chatting to it, I'm like, the only thing I can describe, when you speak to a dog and it turns its head and looks at you, it was doing this to me. And as I went down to pick it up, it was just a log with a bit of snow over the top. And I was like, God, and I'm like, what is going on in my head? How have I just thought that's a manatee,
Yeah, I was going to ask you as to that. I've swam with manatees in the Florida Keys.
Yeah, not in the Arctic.
I've never been to the Arctic. Yeah. Not why a manatee would come to mind, but it just goes to show.
Yeah,
the mind will do amazing things. It's not necessarily good and bad, but it will do incredible things.
It's phenomenal. And then later on in the trail, I seen a mouse. Then I'm actually thinking, did I see a mouse? Or was that the mouse from the Gruffalo? Because that's been playing in my head because my kids are the Gruffalo. And this hallucination thing just kept going. And the hallucination, I've experienced hallucination before in the military, where I thought I'd seen a herd of elephants on Thetford training area, But,
is that through sleep deprivation?
Sleep deprivation, you do a 4-day no sleep digging thing. So, yeah. And then I got to that checkpoint, and I could not feel my arm. This is obviously the surgery. So I was like, I got there and I literally could not feel it. And 2 years prior to me getting on the race, there was a guy who lost both feet and both hands through hypothermia, frostbite. So they're very, very rigid on it. So you get a check at every checkpoint. And he's like, the guy at the checkpoint says, no, just how? And I says, yeah, I just can't feel my hand. And I wish I'd never said that. And he said, because the next stretch was across an open point where you're not really going to get rescued for maybe up to like 10 hours, you know. And he says, right, can you just demonstrate this? And I couldn't even unclip my clips on my pulk to get my tent out. So if shit was to go wrong, I would have ended up dead, you know, because I couldn't get myself into cover or anything, or get my food out or anything like that. And he says, we're pulling you off. And I had mild frostbite around my nose and here, like the frost nip, I suppose, is all swollen up. But I loved that feeling. I loved it. And I was in my element, you know.
What do you think you learned from the experience?
Not to go 7 weeks after surgery. I learned that I probably would have prepped myself a bit more. So as my prep was run around the Isle of Wight. I went to Portsmouth University into a cold chamber. There's a professor down there that deals with extreme cold. And yeah, I probably prepped a little bit better. I'm not very renowned for prepping before these events at all. I tend to just go, like when I ran the five marathons in 50 hours. The furthest run I did previous to that was 10 kilometers, like in the lead up to it, you know. So I'm not very good at prepping for these, and this is what people.
Why is that? Do you think, is it? I don't want to make any assumptions, but is it almost like the overthinking? It's like, don't overthink it, just do it.
Yeah, exactly that. And I quote this in the 5 and 50. It says, if you think you're going to do something, the thought's already there, so just do it. Go and do it. When I did the 10 ultra distance triathlons, so Ironman, I'd never done a triathlon in my life. So they said I didn't know what it would feel like. I had to learn properly how to do a front call because of my shoulder again, you know, and that type of stuff. And I was worried, what if I do an Ironman and I don't like it, you know? And I already told everyone I'm going to do it, and I've got these sponsors on board and that. So the weekend before that, 6 weeks before the 10 Ironman, I'd just paddleboarded east to west coast of Scotland down the Caledonian Canal, cycled 800 kilometers on a bike. Day one, fell off, broke my 2 ribs. Carried on going for the rest of that, stopped in some Midlands hospital, and they says, your ribs are broke, you need rest. Said to the doctor, I've got 200k to go tomorrow and then I'm running a marathon. And he says, you can't do that. Obviously I went and did it, finished that with Help for Heroes. 6 weeks later, I was doing the 10 Ironman event, and most people I worked out trained for like a year for an Ironman. I'd still not even done a triathlon yet. So the weekend before that, I did a double Ironman. I did one on the Saturday and one on the Sunday just to see what it was like, and I felt good. And I led into it, and away I went. So
how does it make you feel when that doctor's there? When someone, that doctor maybe is the example, but anyone were to say to you, you can't. What's the response to that?
Watch me. Really? I had it in was it the 10 triathlons or another event? I think it was the 10 triathlons. They says you can't run, stress fractures, and I spoke to this doctor actually in the States called Russ, who I met on the Arctic, and I knew whatever he says, it'll be all right. So I couldn't, I had a severe Achilles tendonitis because you're doing a lot of running and, you know, on the cycle and that. Literally couldn't. And his words were, just strap that foot up, man, you know, and that was in an American pure way. So I strapped my foot up, so I literally had no flex in it whatsoever and just carried on. I thought, I'll listen to him. You know, he's a doctor. It's a bit like anything, isn't it? You can find eating a Chinese every night is probably healthy for if you search for it, you know?
Yeah. That's almost that confirmation bias.
I was getting this confirmation for someone who I knew was a bit of a lunatic anyway, but he's a doctor. But everyone else says you can't go on. You're literally going to physically, the same as the 10 marathons in 100 hours, you know, had 5 stress fractures, and they're like, you need to stop. And I'll just slow down, you know, and that's why I didn't finish the 10 and did 8, but I just kept going.
Is that something that, you know, I don't want to be so simplistic as to say, like, you know, I'd be the first to admit that if someone tells me, not in the context that you're describing, but, you know, I don't know, somebody says to me, you can't do that. And I'll think, well, no, I probably can. I'll find a way to do it. But I'm talking about, you know, I just don't like being told what to do. So it's a bit obnoxious. But the truth is, I just don't like being told what to do. Yeah. But there are these authority figures that we, you know, whether it's your teacher at school or your mum, or in the case of a medical professional, we kind of put our trust in these people. We kind of think, yeah, you've done X amount of years of medical study. You probably know what you're talking about. I don't, therefore, I'll rely on that information you've just supplied me with, and I probably shouldn't continue.
Yeah.
But that, for you, that's not a thought process through which you go, it would appear. Is that something you've always had, and where does it stem from? Were you like that as a kid?
Yeah, probably, I think back to my childhood, so I grew up in Northern Ireland. I was born in 85, troubles were still kicking off then and just going on, When I was 8, I witnessed my first shooting, someone being kneecapped. He was a person who was in the IRA, but in my area, I was a Protestant area. And that was that sort of, I was always that one to be out there, I got a Spider-Man suit for one of my birthdays. I'm going to jump out my bedroom window, it's that. I was always like, oh, no one can climb up that tree. I'm getting up that tree, And I remember once actually my mum saying this. Someone said to my mum, they were walking to the shop and they said, don't look over, but Darren is on top of the flats. There was this massive wall, and I never forget it. And it was like, who could jump off that, And don't shout, because I was literally hanging off a wall, at this point, getting up there. And my mum looked over, and I remember as I jumped down, because no one said you could do it, and this is, I don't know what age I was, maybe 10. I remember landing, and as I landed, I remember my knee came right up and smashed me in my face, and poof, and I broke a nose. So already by 10, I broke my nose about 2 or 3 times, and my mum coming running over, and that. So probably it does stem into a bit of my character back then. Then going and joining the army and doing stuff with the physical training instructor, and I was renowned in the military for being fit. That's why I went and being a PTI. I think the fittest pisshead you'd ever know, that type of thing. Because in the military, we all drank a lot in Germany. That's what we did every weekend. We went on it. But yet still being able to wake up and run 16 miles the next day or whatever, very happily, And I would always push myself in there. When someone says you can't do something, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go and do it. That's a massive fuel to me. But also when a medical professional, when you're mid these events and says something like that, I'm like, who are you to tell me that when you've not put yourself in my position and you don't know what the body can do more? We only learn and know so much about the body, right? And it can, when your body tells you to stop as a protection, it's a mechanism to protect your body without getting more injured. So if you can find the key in how to unlock that and push through that, it's limitless, really.
And everybody's different, right?
Correct.
We all think, we're all connected the same way. We're all built the same, but we're not.
No. Yeah. But I believe we can all unlock that potential. You just got to find the key for unlocking it. And my key is mainly my girls, because I want to make them proud and say, oh, my dad did this, And when they see me on the TV and I've done all these things in the news, they're like, oh, it's daddy there. They're my number one fans, and I really, really want to make them proud. They say, well, don't want to talk about them, but them and then Aggie, the little girl I raised the money for.
I want to come on to that, because the thing that strikes me is that there might be some that would say, not me, I hasten to add, but that there are those that say, well, some of these things you're doing, they're a bit selfish, right? They're a bit self-indulgent. They're about you achieving something. They're not. I think and the reason I say it that way is because I want to shine the light on the fact that there is another side to all of this as to for whom you're doing it. To your point around, your girls, and I understand that kind of, making they'll be proud of you. I can assure you of that. But they'll be proud of you anyway. You're their dad. Yeah. But there is a selflessness to this that I find really insightful as to who you are as a human being, because you're raising and have raised enormous sums of money for significant charities, people who really need it. And that is a side of it I think we've not yet shone a spotlight on. You mentioned Aggie. Let's talk a bit about how that, the 5 marathons in 50 hours, how did that all come? Who is she? How did it all come about?
Yeah, so Aggie, how I got to know of Aggie, I'd written a book about 70%. And I was like, I'm not a good writer. So I thought, I need a writer to make this, from here to here, and a number one bestseller. So I did a bit of research. I seen Rich Waters was a sort of, I call it a famous behind-the-scenes ghostwriter. Not many people would have heard of them, but we'd have heard of his books. So Ollie Ollerton, James Haskell, Adam Peaty, Tyson Fury. He's written a lot. Lonely Planet books that you probably wouldn't know. And it's quite nice because Rich really sees a lot of my potential in there, and he's written about me in James Haskell's book, in Adam Peaty's book, and
Did you know him?
Who?
Rich before?
No. So this is how I got to know him.
Yeah,
no connection whatsoever. And then that's even evolved to something like, it was a big piece in the paper in Northern Ireland said Northern Ireland war hero was my idol from Adam Peaty, and I'm like, wow, someone sent it to me, it's fantastic, Olympic gold medalist swimmer, saying that about me, So Rich and I got together, we had a chat.
How did this happen? Because to your point,
internet, literally just looked him up on the internet.
And got in touch. Found an email address or whatever. I
found his number, I think it was, and I texted him, and poof, that was it. When I was researching him, I'd seen an article in the news about him and his wife Ali and their daughter Aggie, who has this rare genetic brain disease. I don't even want to try and pronounce it, but it's type 4 leukodystrophy or something along those lines, and it affects the brain. It's a white matter in the brain. And it starts then to affect the neural part, so speech, movement. And Aggie started, I don't want to say started as a normal kid, she was a normal kid, but Aggie started normally, and they just thought she was a bit behind in like walking, talking. She then started to wear a leg brace, and then it got worse and worse, and now she's completely like in a dependent on other people completely.
How old is she now?
15, she's turned 15. So
how old was she when you first met her?
She must have been about 12, 11, 12.
Okay, yeah.
And even I've seen the deterioration in these past couple of years. And I said to Rich, put my book on hold as a father, because I've seen a lot of similarities. My girl's little blonde girls. Aggie's a little blonde girl. And I seen the video on, I think it was the Sun online newspaper. And I was like, I just started to cry, and I said, put my book on hold. How can I help you? And that's where it said. So all these events have been towards Aggie, every single one of them. And even outside of it, Aggie needed a new wheelchair. There's one place in the country that makes a wheelchair. So I reached out to people. It's quite interesting. People are always like, yeah, I'll help. And then I ordered a wheelchair for $3,000. And then the money didn't come. And I'm like, only a bit came in. And quite a bit, so a couple of grand came in actually from the Pilgrim Bandit charity. So Matt Hillier, as a friend, he put a couple of grand into this wheelchair, and then I was like, God, I've put the rest in my credit card, and because I need to deliver this wheelchair because I promised it. And then other bits, and then it turns out I've raised thousands and tens of thousands of pounds for them, but also awareness of it. So I've connected up the media guy, Mark from Sway PR, who puts all my media on the news and stuff, connected him into Synaptics Bio, which is a company set up to get investment for treatment. And only this year, it's now signed off. The treatment is available in the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia. And hopefully Aggie can be out there in the autumn time to start this treatment. And there's a potential that the treatment will reverse the symptoms. So I remember when we got the wheelchair and I met up with Aggie and her mum, and we went for a walk, and we said, we might not even need another one, this could potentially, and that's Aggie's mum is phenomenal, what she does, and that belief, because you have to have belief, right? And your purpose, and their purpose is to bring Aggie back to how she was. And I love her to bits. I love her like she's my own daughter, and I'm going to keep raising money and raising awareness to get this over the line, because I'm now dedicated to do that.
It's emotional to hear you talk about it, and you don't need my endorsement as to the choices that you're making and the reasons why you're doing it, but it's a wonderful thing you're doing, and I think that needs to be acknowledged. And we're very fortunate that there are people like you in this world who will go out their way to help those less fortunate. So all credit to you, and it explains a lot about what drives you. You mentioned purpose there, and the purpose of Aggie's mum, for example. So what's your purpose?
We chatted about this, Rich and I, when I think he was writing one of his books, maybe James or Adam Peaty's actually. We talked a lot about purpose, goals and whys, and for me they're very different, and my purpose, when you take away what I foresee as a man, so man, woman, with the purpose of a man for me, going back to caveman days, is that hunter-gatherer, is that piece, protection, keeping family safe. I'm very much all around that. My purpose, I think now, is to inspire and change through inspiring people, whether that's getting them up. And I do have quite a few messages now, so I don't drink alcohol at all anymore. It's amazing the amount of mates who I served with who all drank together who actually saying you're an inspiration, and those really get me ticking, and even right down to the school level. So I would do some talks in schools and stuff, and actually going through the process now of launching a business and doing that, and bringing a tribe of really high performing people together to inspire other people to do more. There's the way the world has been changing. I wouldn't always necessarily say it's been for the better. Yes, in some areas with the way it is, but we're seeing more stress on the NHS through obesity and mental health problems, whereas actually a lot of that keys to unlocking the way we can actually deal with that is a bit of self-care, right? We spoke about it before this, about self-care with like your fasting, your greens, dedicating some time to yourself. And it's taken me a long time to realize what self-care is. But for me, even that's just getting up in the morning, go for a walk, whilst everyone else is asleep, love it, or run, or going to the gym. So my purpose is to inspire as many people as possible and, create that sort of legacy of how I do that. And by a lot of that is just by doing the basics well, even if it is running 100 kilometers, pulling a car or whatever next, or my next one, I'm going to pull an airplane for a marathon, whatever that it may be. It's just doing the basics of that well. So the basics for me, when I pull the car or going to pull this airplane or running a marathon or whatever, is putting one foot in front of the other. And that I'm inspired with Aggie when I've been doing these events and I've been like, how am I going to go on? I would always FaceTime Aggie and she's only in the videos and that. And that's all I need is a click or a phone call to my girls. And that's all I need is because I'm like, well, Aggie can't walk, so I'll do it for her, Oh, it's only a stress fracture, it'll heal. My toenails are falling off, okay, they'll heal. Actually, they're not healing. They're in bits still. But, they still, that's what I'm going to do. And that's what I'm going to keep going until I make a bigger dent in the market in it,
All credit to you. I mean, I've heard you mention that it's, and I think I quote, it's the mental fortitude that enables me to adapt and overcome. I wanted to ask the question is to ask you to expand on how you developed that fortitude over the years. But I think it's very evident of, the adversity that you faced, not only in the conflict zone, real, absolute life-threatening adversity, but also life-threatening adversity that, respectfully, for want of a better phrase, you brought upon yourself by undertaking some of these, minus 54 in the Yukon with wolves is there's comfort zones and there's comfort zones. You're really pushing yourself. Do you think that sort of is it like, my sense is it's a bit like a muscle, much the same way you can train a muscle to be stronger. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's true as well as fortitude and that mental strength, that it is something that you can hone and develop? I guess in equally to which you can also do damage and detriment. So it's got that sort of flexibility, mental fortitude. Is that a fair assumption?
Absolutely, and you can train it. And I'm under this, and I've tried to experiment with myself on these events. You make a decision to take a step forward, or run, whatever it may be, or lift a weight, or lift that glass, whatever it may be, and your mind obviously sends that trigger to do it. Your mind tells us the control center, right? I've been trying to experiment, and anyone scientific will laugh at me in this, but just do it and then let your mind know you're doing it. Even though you're making that decision from the mind first of all, but if you just do it and then your mind has to catch up with like, God, we're doing this again.
We really are doing this.
Yeah. And you mentioned about training the mind, and I think David Goggin mentions about this. It's like calluses on your fingers. Lift weights, blisters come, then they just get hard piece of skin. Do the exact same for the mind. But the key to do that, in my eyes, is that nutrition. You can't just train over and over and over again by putting yourself in these areas out of comfort. You've got to have the right food and fuel in there, then you've got to have the right training and that in there. And then sleep, for example, as well. Those factors all come to what I call creating a bulletproof mindset. And the bulletproof mindset is enabled to, it's a bit more like stoicism, in that way to carry on and go. But you mentioned there about, that growth mindset and putting yourself out of your comfort zone. Personally, I don't believe you can grow without going outside your comfort zone. So people will quite happily just stay in the comfort zone and just plod along, which is fine if you want to do that. It's like that experiment, when you put a load of fleas in a jar with a lid on, they'll only jump as high as the lid. Take the lid off, they're still going to jump as high. And then they put them in there without it, they're going to jump way out of and it's the exact same. Out of your comfort zone, they don't know what's outside of that jar, the flea. They're way out of the comfort zone, but they take that leap and they're outside it, and it's freedom, right? So, like Jocko Willink says, discipline is freedom. So put yourself outside the comfort zone and you'll create freedom for that.
And what about how you select, therefore, those challenges that are going to ensure that you are continuing to strengthen that muscle? Because I guess it's a bit like, I'm going to draw daft analogies, but you go to the gym and all you do is lift a 10K weight. So if all you do is lift a 10K weight, eventually lifting that 10K weight is just lifting a 10K weight. Whereas when the first time you lift it, it's an effort, but then eventually the body goes, okay, I'm comfortable with 10K, whatever the number might be.
Yeah.
So do you find, therefore, that you have to, you can get to a point where the body or the mind in particular might say, oh, it's just 100K today. Next time, so I'm comfortable now with 100K. I'm now in my comfort zone. I'm going to need 150K or whatever the number might be. Do you have to keep pushing and stretching that bit further to expand that comfort zone? And if so, therefore, how do you go about selecting the events you undertake?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, because, just take a marathon, for example, or take that 10 kilo weight, it's like, I'm going to do 10 reps. Then you do 20 reps, or you up the weight, right? And then it becomes harder and harder and able to go on. So the selection for me is something I've never done before. Mainly when I start to talk about it, people are like, nah, you can't do that. I'm doing that, Is
that how you kind of get those signals? You get that sense of, okay, so if people are questioning the validity of what I might be able to achieve, that's an incentive enough already for me to take this a bit more seriously.
Correct. Yes, exactly that. And to do it like, with the adventure triathlon, 933 Ks, finishing on a marathon, I'm just going to carry the bike, why not? If I've just started with it, so finish with it type thing. And twisting the norm into something that's not normal. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not built for running, but I wouldn't think twice of just like last week, I went to go out for a 5K run and ran 22, it was just no prep, just did it because I felt comfortable in the run and I was listening to my body and I was thinking and I just went. The issue was I had no water, no anything with me. I just kept going. So, which made it harder for me, which pushed me out of my comfort zone on a Monday evening, of just doing that. So selecting them is pretty much what's impossible, what's people going to think is impossible, or what's not been done before. So the altitude center we mentioned there, 190 kilometers in at 12,500 feet. They were like, this is mental. And when you watch the video to that, even them, then you've got Nimsdai, who's obviously done the 18 or 8 highest peaks, or 14 highest peaks over 8,000. Even when he was in there and he's doing this altitude ninja, he's not even gone as what I did. I did, 190 kilometers in there at hard rate. When we took the mask off that simulates the height, which was like breathing through a straw, I was blue. Your oxygen levels are supposed to be at 98% saturated oxygen levels. Mine dropped to 64, which anything below 80, they reckon you should be admitted to hospital. And I was at 64 on a treadmill running 10K in 55 minutes, at that point.
And how are you feeling physically at that moment?
Horrendous.
I can imagine.
That was, they were like, you need to stop. And I'm like, keep saying that because I'm going to keep going. And I remember, and it's actually in the video, when as soon as I take the mask off, I'm blue all around here. And it's on the YouTube video. So I'll send that one actually. And just after that first one, I'm so blue around here. And that mass simulated there. And then I'm only dropping to 9,000 feet because the room I'm in's at altitude at 9,000. So I'm not even dropping right down. But that breath of fresh, that first air when you bring it in to transition onto the bike for 150K is like, thank God for that, And then because that first 10K, I couldn't eat or drink because I have a mask on. So we had to then sometimes quickly lift up and take a sip and then back on, So it's all the logistics around doing that as well. But people are like, you can't sustain that level of physical activity at that altitude. I'm like, let's go. you know.
So one of the things that strikes me, Darren, and for the benefit of listeners, I'm listening to this, I'm thinking this, it's incredible what you're doing. You're testing the physical and mental limits of what your body is capable of. How do you cope with when things go wrong? I want to say failure, but I think failure is a really interesting word as to how we define failure, because I think failure arguably is not even starting doing these things in the first place, I might suggest. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that's interesting for me to observe is that you're consistently throughout, someone telling you can't do something, it's like, I'm going to find a way to tell you that I can. The only time one thing that strikes me about the very beginning of our conversation is the emotion that was attached to being told you can't soldier anymore. And actually I suspect there was that mental, that kind of, I know I can't, even though I think I can, even though I think you guys are wrong. There's a legal precedent here that means that what you're telling me is now preventing me from doing that. So there's no alternative. Yeah. So you and that clearly manifests in the form of a quite understandable emotional response. But what else kind of strikes me about there will be times when you're doing these things where you will face the prospect of not being able to get over a finish line or whatever you want to define it. There's going to be elements of false starts or failures or not achieving something. Yeah. And how does that play out for you?
Not too well, actually. So let's take the 10 and 100. I didn't complete 10 marathons. During that event, failure to me, I redefined failure as there's no such thing in my eyes.
I'm not sure. I was going to say I'm not sure it's a double negative, but I agree with you. Yeah. Right? I would say the failure was not starting it in the first place.
Correct. Yes. So what I did in that, because this is a good example, because I didn't complete the 10, and I think I did 8, as something said. I just had to adapt and overcome. I mentioned that about in the mental fortitude. You got to adapt and overcome. So I knew I couldn't do 10. What can I do? What can we do? So we took a really good, and as a team, there's a couple of guys that support me during these events, and I'm grateful for them, thankful, and we're a close-knit team. And every other event, they're going to be there to support. What can we do to make it a success? So failure for me is merely a stepping stone to success. So the event was run 10 marathons in 100 hours, and that's it. The actual success of that event was raising as much money for charity as we can. So what we did then halfway through, we were like, okay, let's use this failure, inverted commas, failure of not being able to achieve the goal, and what can we do to make it better? So what we did was we reached out on social media, the power of social media, and we said, I'm going to be short by 120 kilometers, judging by the time it would take to get to the finish line. Who can help? So then all these people started putting in, I've just ran 10K. So people were donating 10 kilometers, 5 kilometers, 1 kilometer to bring me up to that whole thing. So we then got this sort of community of people. And then I think it was like 580 kilometers was touched by, but then that raised the sponsorship, So it was a massive success from something that went wrong. And that's the adapt and overcome piece of how we dealt with it.
I think there's a really interesting lesson in there, because the thing that struck me about the goals that you set yourself is they're very kind of, they're finish line oriented goals, aren't they? In terms of how they're first perceived. I read them out at the beginning. There's a distance, and therefore people go, okay, I might not mentally be able to compute what 300 kilometers looks like, but I can go 0 to 300. There's a finish line. Yeah. The perception might be, well, so that's the success is getting across the finish line. But I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it, that you repackage what ultimately success looks like. The byproduct of what you're trying to achieve is that actually I've raised X amount for charity. Yeah. There's the success. Yeah. And you just redefine it.
And that's exactly it.
And that is I might argue that's the real success. And is that therefore where the joy comes from? Do you experience the highs? I had a lady on the podcast, Jen Drummond. Jen is the first woman to climb the 7-second summits. And one of the things we talked about was reaching that summit. And she basically said, in reality, you're on the summit for 10 minutes. Yeah. And after 10 minutes, your first thought is when you get up there, right, I'm here, now I've got to get back down. So the journey is not finished. I'm only halfway there.
Yeah.
Reaching the pinnacle is not the,
sometimes coming down is worse.
It's harder. And she said, and all you're really doing, you might metaphorically take one glance at the top, but then back to your point, it's one step at a time. And that's how you program it. And I think as well, you're right. I remember her saying coming down is more dangerous. So, do you experience that elation when you reach the summit? Because I think this is quite another thing that a lot of people I've talked about who've got kind of quite goal-orientated pursuits is that actually it isn't necessarily, there might be that moment of elation at the finish point or the summit, or however you want to describe it. But actually it's the journey itself, it's the climb or whatever the metaphor might be, is where the real joy comes about and the real test comes about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think I've ever fully felt satisfied with what I've done, if that makes sense. And
that's quite a common trait in my experience.
Yeah. So the bar is always rising, right? And the interesting piece, so vision, mindset, execute is a thing that I've used in the past, is the visualization of it, Even though my book's not been launched yet, it will be launched. And I've visualized it being launched, in the top of the Shard, people there, we're going to talk about it, Aggie there, the lot, and it's a charitable event. I can visualize that, right? And the mindset for me is, how do we piece that together to get there? Then the execution is pretty easy. It's done. That's not the most satisfying one. It's the build up to it, like what I'm doing now. I mentioned I launched a business, an app for a tribe of individuals to come together and make a difference in their lives and in children's lives. The visualization and getting there, next week we're doing some videoing and all of that. I'm really excited. Once it's done and we hit one school, I'm like, right, that's fantastic. Let's hit another school. Let's hit Hampshire. Let's hit the UK, and what can we do to go thing? So yeah, I'm never done, if that makes sense. Never. And some people say, just be satisfied of what you've achieved, which for me is like, right, you can't say that. I'm wired. I don't think I'm wired differently. I think everyone's got it in them. It's just whether they choose to be like that or not. And I just want to keep going. A personal experiment. I just want, what can the body do? I've set a target of being the world's, to do an Ironman in the world's most northerly, it's called the world's most northerly Ironman, which is in a place called Pyramid in Svalbard. It's got a population of 6 people. There's severe chance that I am bricking it about the orcas, the polar bears, the leopard seals. Myself and Tommy from Through Dark mentioned, I had a chat about these leopard seals this morning. All these things that could possibly go wrong, swimming in minus 1.8 in the Arctic. The vision to that is getting there. The struggle for me doing that now is raising funds to get there. But I know that could then make a massive difference in the charitable world if I get to do it, because no one's ever done it. And yeah, once I do that, because I will do it, it's what's next. How can I top that?
Do you ever stop though? We talked a bit about success. Do you ever celebrate that success? And how, therefore, do you, even for a moment, do you ever acknowledge the success that you've achieved?
No, not at all. Because I don't think I've always done my best on it. I'm quite hard on myself like that. So here's an example. 5 marathons, 50 hours along the south coast. We had hit 5,000 meters of altitude up and down it. And that was, or elevation altitude, sorry. We had to finish at, I can't remember the time, let's call it 12 o'clock on the day. We had to finish there because Sky News were there to finish him. I'd done it, I'd ran it, and I got to 42 hours and was basically nearly finished. So I was like, right, I'm just going to get my head down. I literally got my head down for 4 or 5 hours, got up, had a nice chilled leisurely breakfast, and then did the last 10K as if I was just finishing the whole lot, coming in for the camera and that piece. And that's in itself, I think, 5 hours and 5 marathons and 50 hours distance. And I was like, God, I could have done that 40 hours, and that's the way I think, it's just constant. Like when I pulled the car, 53 kilometers, 47 hours nonstop, pulling a car around a 500 meter loop. I was like, I'm thinking, why didn't I do a 2 tons of a car rather than 1.5 ton? so I'm never really satisfied, and I don't celebrate really much. I come from a running, sprinting background, races. I've got an attic filled with trophies. I went to Colorado with the Warrior Games. I set the games records. I've got 2 gold medals. It's just, I just give them to my girls. I've no celebrating that factor at all, really.
That's interesting. Do you? So what does, coming back to this idea of success? What does success mean to you?
Currently, success for me is speeding up this process to get Aggie out there and getting that. So on the charitable front, that's my success. Once that's done, we'll move on to what can we do next on that.
And what do you need to make that happen? What do you need to get Aggie to Philadelphia?
God, I need to. Well, she will be going, but the charity still needs money.
Yeah.
So
it's money, raising funds.
I need money to get me out to the Arctic. That's what I need. It doesn't just come. No. So I need things like that. I need people invest. I need a company to invest in me to get me out there, and I'll advertise the company. That's what I need.
Yeah.
But then, so that's on the charitable front. Real success for me is supporting my daughters and them looking up to me and saying, I'm proud of you, Dad. And breaks me this one. Me and their mum aren't together, and my new partner, Ellie, we are solid, and I want Ellie, her kids and my kids to be like you. We're proud of you, of who you are and what you've achieved. And that's success for me.
Fantastic. And like I've said to you before, you don't need my endorsement, but they will be because it's because of not only what you're doing, I think more importantly why you're doing it and who you're doing it for. I think that's where the pride stems from. There's a kind of, kids look up, they go, wow, my dad's like, you're Superman, right? My dad can do these things.
Yeah.
That there's a hero element to it almost in that regard, but it's the reasons why you're doing it, which I think is where the real pride will come from. And they'll understand that as they start to get older and start to mature, they'll realize the magnitude of what you do, and it's something of which they'll be intensely proud. I've no doubt.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the book. I'm intrigued. Let's shine a spotlight on the book.
Yeah.
What's it called? What's it about? When's it going to be done? Where people are going to be fascinated to read more about it. The things you've done are fascinating.
Yeah. So the book would be out there. It would be there ready. We're just waiting on the right publisher to pick it up. So what I didn't know about writing a book is when you're a first-time publisher and actually your demographic of the type of person you are, your background, where you come from, there's certain times to launch books.
Okay.
Never knew that.
No,
first-time publishers, the last read. So Rich is obviously quite in with some publishers, and at the minute I'm the wrong demographic to launch a book. Middle-aged white male ex-military. They've had it, Cheers Ollie and Ant for Middleton for doing that and getting it there for me. But
I've never thought of it quite like that. But I guess the world says we don't need another one of these books at a sort of moment in time until such time as that comes back round again.
Exactly that. So that's
a great story. I mean, it's just makes a mockery of the way the world is.
Exactly.
I get it.
So I'm just waiting on the right publisher to say, we'll take that to enable Rich to finish it. That's all we're at. The book is about my life. So the book I'd given to Rich, I gave him about 8 chapters, and he's like, right, there's 3 books in here, so it's unpacked. One of the big things is about, this self-help book. So there's a lot of bit around what I would like in that book. I want you to pick that book up and think, God, I can do that, and I can pick something from what you've done, Darren, and I can apply that to my life and it made me a bit better. I talked about the inspiration piece earlier. That's one of the factors from it. But it starts with my sort of childhood in Northern Ireland, growing up where I grew up, and then it sort of comes into the military, and then it talks a bit about life problems where I see, as I mentioned earlier, and it is a tough topic for me, and most people won't like it, but childhood obesity, is a big area. Hence the app that I've got will hopefully fix some of that. Depression, mental illnesses, there's bits in there that I'd like to try and tools that you can take, away and what's different to what we're being told by the media and everything and news, it's okay. not to be okay is a common phrase that everyone in the UK is aware of. No, it's not. You have to do something about it, because you've got to put on your own life jacket before you can help someone else's,
Do you know, sorry to interrupt, but you just made me reflect on a really fascinating conversation I was having with a teacher friend of mine who was talking about around the school in which she works, all these posters saying exactly that. It's okay not to be okay. And she had a kid come and sit down with her, really, really fraught with worry because she wasn't worried about anything. So she's seen all these posters say, and but I'm okay. So what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
And it was like, whoa, okay. So it's a real balance, isn't there, to strike between giving people the understanding that it is good to be talking about these things, and it's okay, and it's important that we share these things, but that actually not forcing people down a route to think, I start to question, well, I'm not worried about anything. Why am I not worried? I'm now worried that I'm not worried about anything.
Really good point, that. Because it does come to almost, it's almost an indoctrination, Yeah,
there's got to be something I need to be worried about. So we start then to encourage this sense of,
10, 15 years ago, it was everyone had back problems and issues. That's what it was. And now it's not that. It's you've got depressed, or you're anxious, depression or anxious, or there's something, or you're labeled as this. I spoke to the CEO at Skanska, a business I worked at, and I was part of a military group. So there was a disabled group, there was a women at work group, there was an LBGT, there was a military, a veteran one, and BAME, so black, Asian, that type of thing. And I was the representative for the ex-military, and I said to Greg, I think his name was, the CEO at the time, I was like, why are we pigeonholing people into these groups? Because it was about inclusive and diversity, And inclusion for me is you're putting people in boxes already,
It's a really good point.
You're ex-military, so you go there. Oh, you're disabled, so you can go there. You're LBGT, so you can go there. That's not inclusion. You're putting people into segments,
I've never thought of it that way before, but
I'm like, really interesting. Why are we doing that? Everyone is. This is what I like about the military.
Just people.
Yeah, and this is what I like about the military. Regardless where you come from, what your background is, if you do your job, you're good. And I'm like, okay, so why are we not just like that in the business world? So yeah, it's quite an interesting topic. So going back to the book, if the all this is going to be in there, about it, and there are touchy subjects, but they're subjects that we need to hear, and we need to address. And a lot of that comes back down to, as I mentioned at the very start, about your self-care, looking after yourself and you being a role model, and with the Stay Strong business app is you're a role model, and you're going to enable me to go into schools and talk about resilience and stuff. So that's where we're at,
So with the benefit of hindsight, what advice would you give 21-year-old Darren Hardy?
They always say that hindsight's a wonderful thing, don't they? What advice would I give? I would say, don't worry too much about what other people think. I seen just the other day a really good quote, and I love it. And it was something about, if you care, if you can't give up something for a year, then you worry. And if you can't lower yourself as a person for a year, so I'm taking out as a practical way, downgrade your house, downgrade your car for 1 year to enable lifelong success, you worry too much about what other people think. So that for me was I think it might have been Jim Carrey that said it, I think. So that would be one piece of advice. And the other piece of advice I would give myself, and I know people in this, especially in this country, go through it, I would have not drank alcohol. I believe it really puts a ceiling on your potential. I mentioned the other day, I've not drank in just over a year. Yeah. Literally at all. Like not a sip. And I was never a big drinker before. I wasn't one of these people that came home and had a drink with my dinner. I was a binge drinker like most people in the UK. Yeah. I got together with my military mates. I went to a rugby match, which we can't speak about rugby at the weekend, being an Ireland fan. and you drank. You go on a stag do, you drink. And I've never felt more positive and the beauty of life for not drinking. It has changed the way I am as a person. And a big part of that is looking after my inner tribe of my missus and my kids. and family and friends, that, we all go out. I take everyone home. I feel safe. I'm good that they're safe, and I go to sleep. So those two bits of advice. So don't care what other people think, which actually could relate into the non-drinking, because you're peer pressured into it.
Yeah.
And don't drink. They're the two biggest pieces of advice I'd probably give 21-year-old Darren Hardy back then.
And where should we send listeners to find out more? Because I think there's so many fascinating things you're doing. You've got so much great knowledge to impart and share. Where should we be pointing people, directing
this is the bit
people?
I'm not very good at. So I have an Instagram account, Darren_Hardy4. 4 is in there because it's my lucky number. And I think there's already a Darren Hardy out there. He's a famous author in the United States. Through that, you can Google, actually, if you Google Darren Hardy UK, because I mentioned another one, there's the first 5 pages of all the events that I've done, and there'll be ways in there to get in contact. But maybe through Instagram and with the Stay Strong app that I've launched. That's where you're going to get all the information on what we've just spoke about for the past hour, on how you can do what I'm doing, basically, in essence, because if you can run a kilometer, you can run a marathon, you can run 100,
It's just, to your point, it's one step. I think I think the first step is the most important step, right?
If you don't take the step, it's that what if you don't want to be sitting here in 10 years and thinking, what if? You can use the next 6 months and think about what if, or you can use the next 6 months to celebrate your success of what you've been doing. It's what if.
Darren, it's a great message you share. I mean, I originally, Extrology was established with the mission to educate, inspire, and entertain. And you've done all of those in abundance today, and then some. So I really appreciate you taking the time out to come and talk with us. And I'm really looking forward to what next. I think that there's just so many. My mind's running 10 to the dozen. I had 14 questions today.
Yeah.
I think I asked the first one that I'd written down, and you've just shared so much of what I wanted to cover. There's such rich content there. You've done so many fascinating things. I could have talked for days. I really appreciate you taking the time. So every success with what you got going on. The app looks terrific. I think it's a great initiative. I think tackling issues like childhood obesity, I mean, it's a complex topic, but it needs to be addressed. And you're certainly the kind of person who goes and grabs these things by the proverbial and makes it happen. I applaud you and really appreciate you taking the time out today.
Yeah, thanks very much. I really appreciate it, Lee, and I'm looking forward to, I'm sure we'll do more down the line.
Absolutely. There's lots more we should do.
I'm sure we'll stay in contact too, because, appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's Extrology podcast. I really appreciate your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed it, then why not hop onto iTunes and give us a review? I'd really appreciate anything that you might have to say. Any feedback always gratefully received, and look forward to hosting you next time. See you soon. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.